Hey, welcome back to Overanalyzing Steven Universe. So this video is going to be a little bit longer than the last two. I'm not certain, that's just a guess. It's gonna take longer to produce because I have to research the damage done to the boardwalk, house, and town in this episode. I began writing this script back in early February 2022. And I am now returning to it in late November 2022. I got overwhelmed really quickly by the idea of returning to it because of the amount of research I felt it would be necessary for me to do to continue talking about this show. I've been through a lot this year. My living situation has changed, and I went from living with my entire family and constant background noise to living on my own. I want to avoid hurting people in this fan base, because this show is very special to a lot of people. But with that being said, the closer that I look at this show, the less I find myself believing that it's as perfect as I used to think maybe the first or second time that I saw it. Despite the flaws that are present in many of this show's episodes, and especially with the critical last arc of the series that I might not ever get to, this show is still one of my favorite cartoons, and I've mostly forgiven the flaws that might make others turn away from it. With all that being said, let's take a look at the drastic differences between our first two pilots to this series. Today, I am finally returning to this series to talk about the pilot that I most definitely prefer, Laser Light Cannon. So in this episode, animated by Rough Draft Studios, the difference in art styles is apparent. The character models all look different, except for Amethyst, who travels through space and time and 2 different animation studios, and at least 4 sets of storyboard artists, and usually looks like Amethyst no matter what. Garnet, Pearl, and Steven all look a little different in this episode. They're all more realistically proportioned, it would seem. But what I always notice before anything is the palette. In these early episodes, it really is the most glaring inconsistency. I've been doing research for days looking at character models from each studio and storyboard artist to make sure I have a solid amount of information before talking about this. So I've seen a lot of criticism lobbied towards this show's art style, because each storyboard artist draws the characters slightly differently. This isn't something I usually mind, because they all look alike enough, and it works for the early episodic stories being told. There is a certain type of Steven, usually animated by Rough Draft, that I really don't like looking at. But other than that, I love this show's art style. The inconsistencies are most jarring in these earlier episodes, when we have massive stylistic shifts, like Gem Glow to Laser Light Cannon. Once we get into the later seasons, I find it much less noticeable. So let's get into discussing the episode. I think, story-wise, this episode has a lot more love put into it. While I prefer the clean pastel animation of Gem Glow, I strongly feel that this episode tells a more nuanced story and can be looked into a lot deeper than Gem Glow can. Okay, I'll be honest. I just really love episodes that Greg is in. I feel like he grounds the show in a really relatable way. Partially because he's a coward, also because he is quite flawed. Like my other favorite character, Pearl. And in this episode, I feel like we get to see a little bit deeper into their flaws. And we get to see that Rose really did not think this whole thing through. Even though I've already seen it, I want to know more about the world and the characters, because this episode is great at dangling information in the distance. Okay, I'm sorry, but this shot of them running up the hill looks fucking terrible. I'm glad I didn't have to look at it for very long. I love this Amethyst moment. Despite Pearl acting like Amethyst was goofing off, Amethyst brought Steven straight to the temple after seeing the red eye. And because this is before her character arc with inferiority truly begins, she calmly tells Pearl that they were just eating fry bits.
Garnet! Pearl! We saw. Some of us are trying to protect humanity. Where were you? Eating fry bits.
So this tells us a bit about their characters right away, and sets up their long-term dislike of each other.
It's going to crash into Beach City and crush us, along with a bunch of oblivious, innocent people. We have to stop it.
God, Pearl, what happened to protecting Steven from the details of how bad a situation is? Just look at his face!
My mom?
If Rose were here, this would be so easy.
I know, but she's not.
So this is more set up for 2 things. The insensitive way the Jims tend to talk about Rose not being here, right in front of Steven, and the way Pearl is always more emotional and more affected than the other Jims are about Rose.
Greg is nice, Steven, but I doubt Rose would entrust someone like him with such a powerful weapon.
Your dad is kind of a mess, Steven.
Amethyst!
I'm just saying, even if she did leave it with him, he probably broke it, or lost it, or dropped it in the ocean by now.
Here's some more setup for Pearl's long-term dislike of Greg. And Amethyst kinda out of pocket here. What would possess him to drop it in the ocean? Also, Garnet, future vision. If the possibility exists that Steven and Greg bring the cannon, he probably didn't lose it. Yes, here comes Gregory, baby! This episode does an excellent job of introducing him and portraying Steven and Greg's bond. However, this scene is a little sad. Greg looks up at Steven and struggles to identify him. Is it because they don't see each other that often at all, or because Greg just woke up and believes it to be nighttime, despite the fact that the sun is currently setting?
The gems told me not to get involved with magic stuff. It could be dangerous or interfere with what's left of my hair.
Oh, Greg, if only you knew.
A magical storage unit!
Huh. Not exactly, but some would say there's magic inside.
I love Steven's blank stare as a reaction to the joke. I think they should have used that more often. It's very childlike. This whole sequence of him crawling through the storage unit is very well done. It's adorable, we get plenty of information about Greg's relationship to Rose and about what his life before Steven was like. And we get insight into how Steven reacts when others talk about his mother, which gradually changes throughout the series. Here, he doesn't really know enough about her to feel any kind of way about it, but he's still mystified with the way his father and the Jims talk about her. I'm also a big fan of this song. It's called Dad Museum.
It's like a dad museum.
Yeah, that figures.
Is it gonna be okay?
Yeah, that figures. This thing's gotta be like at least a couple £1,000, right? At least one. Steven being Greg's biggest fan is adorable, but what is this goofy animation?
I know I'm not that tall. I know I'm not that smart. But let me drive my van into your heart. Let me drive my van into your...
They did my boy Frog-like. I also do not understand Rose's thought process here. She gave a very powerful weapon to Greg, and made a password only the two of them, and eventually Steven would know. If the possibility exists that Homeworld will return, not to mention all of the dangerous corrupted gems that still roam the earth, why would she not want to leave it with her allies, who she knows can protect Steven if the situation gets bad because of the mess she left behind? Does she not trust them with a weapon like that? Maybe bismuth made her wary. Okay, now for absolutely the most taxing part of this video. Figuring out how much damage this eye does to Beach City and to Steven's house. While I think this is going to be funny, I am god-awful at math. I was held back in 6th grade for a 12% in math class, which, in hindsight, I think could have been prevented if I had realized I have dyscalculia. This created a massive amount of math anxiety for me, so ending my videos with this is going to continue to be a challenge for me. So I'm not really sure, because I get bored when people put math in videos. So I'm going to put a timestamp right here if you want to skip past all the math and just go straight to the total. But I also don't want you to think that I'm pulling these numbers out of my ass. I did try really hard to get some accurate-ish results for this, but because this is a fictional show, and we don't really have any idea how their currency works, I'm just going to be taking local prices from where Delmarva is meant to be, which is Maryland, Delaware, and Virginia. I'm looking at the typical pricing for storm repairs. I'm also looking at roof repairs in this area, and then I am de-inflating those numbers down to 2013 when the show was produced. So the gems cost to fix the house after this is going to be somewhere around $6,000 to $8,000. For the sake of the total, we're going to make it an even 7. Now for Beach City, I'm just going to go ahead and estimate that this sign is going to be about $100 for the Frymans. To be generous or lazy, we're going to assume that because these power lines didn't tear, that they're fine. This car is definitely fucked up, and for lack of information about the model or any issues with it, I'm going to assume it'll be about around $4,000 to repair or get a car of similar quality. And I'm going to assume that this section of boardwalk is around 16 by 30, so plugging that into a deck cost calculator gives us the number $3,310. I'm gonna go ahead and throw another $500 on for the various places with smoke coming from them. So the total damage for Beach City is $7,910. Let me know in the comments if you disagree with my calculations. And tell me what you think the damages actually are. If I agree, I'll add it to the end of this video and post. Damages for the series total so far? $15,960. Alright, back to the episode. Hey, what is this? Who should I hold responsible for this? Rebecca? Kat? What is this? I really like the way that this scene is done. You can tell that this is where a lot of this episode's budget went. The entire beach is soaked in red light, and these characters are drawn in a palette that we don't see often, similar to the Return's sinister green palette. I really like how mystified everyone is with Rose's canon. You can tell by each person's reaction that they're completely absorbed in what is happening, and that they still see her as somewhat of a deity rather than a peer. I also think that the sound design here is really cute. So I'm going to give this episode a mid-high rank. I love Greg's presence in this episode, and I also like the way that Rose's character is explored through everyone's feelings about her. This episode really plants the seeds of her long-term backwards character arc. Unlike the other videos, I'm not really gonna do a long outro for this one, because I feel I've said plenty already. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks for watching this far if you did. See you in the next one. Maybe.